So this is the first in a set of videos to go through the whole Bible. In heaven there was God, the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, and his angels. Satan was the most important angel. Satan liked the power he had, and he became arrogant and wanted even more. He became jealous of Jesus and started to take Jesus' role. One day the Father saw what was happening, so he announced to everyone that Jesus is equal to himself and in charge of every angel. Satan was unhappy with this, and he told the other angels that this announcement meant that they had to be a servant to Jesus and follow God's law, which would make life unhappy. He said he wouldn't follow Jesus, and that Satan should have the power that Jesus has. The angels debated. Some were unhappy because they couldn't see why Jesus was given unlimited power by the Father, and felt that Jesus shouldn't have this authority. Satan made some of them question whether it was right that God had a law that they had to obey. And Satan said that if he was in charge, he would make sure there wasn't a law and they were free. The angels on God's side tried to convince Satan that Satan was still just as important as before God made the announcement. Satan refused to listen and told the angels that were on God's side that they were slaves. The angels on God's side were surprised that the other angels were actually rebelling against God. Satan told them that he would be a better leader than God and everyone would be free. Satan thought that if he got all the angels on his side, then he would be equal to God. God's angels warned the others to stop listening to Satan and to go back to God. Lots of the angels actually did this and went back. Satan then said that he knew God's law, and that according to the law, if they went back to God, God would make them into slaves. God could have thrown Satan out of heaven straight away, but he wanted everyone to see that he was being fair and to give everyone a chance to show how they felt. God got everyone together, and Satan said he was unhappy that Jesus was more important than him, and that Jesus got to have secret conversations with the Father. The Father told everyone that Jesus was above every angel, and all angels must follow him. He told Satan he could no longer live in heaven. Then Satan pointed to all the angels that were on his side, which were nearly half of all the angels in heaven, and said that there were too many angels following him for God to throw them all out. He said that he would fight to stay in heaven. God answered that all of Satan's angels must leave, because happiness in heaven can only exist if they obey the law. Satan disagreed and claimed the angels were good and holy people, and no unhappiness would occur without a law, so everyone should do whatever they want to do. Then there was war. God and his angels won, and Satan and his angels were thrown out from heaven. Heaven was then peaceful and harmonious again, but there was a sadness at the loss of the angels that had been thrown out. The Father and Jesus immediately started planning the creation of earth and humans. Because of what happened in heaven, they decided to test whether humans would choose to follow God. The Father and Jesus then created the world. They made the world and two humans, Adam and Eve. Everything was beautiful, much more beautiful than today. And Adam and Eve didn't wear any clothes. They were clothed with the light of God. Adam and Eve were given everything to make them happy. God told them to eat fruits and seeds. The garden they lived in was covered with fruits. One of the trees was the tree of life. Eating this stopped any aging or illness and gave them eternal life.
The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was near the tree of life. This tree was the test that God set up to see whether humans would follow him. God told Adam and Eve not to eat it or even touch it, and if they did, they would die. Adam and Eve had everything needed to be happy, and they were happy. However, God allowed Satan to tempt them to eat from the forbidden tree. If they passed the test, Adam and Eve would have eternal life with God. Satan was now on earth. He and all the angels were shocked and unhappy with being thrown out of heaven. They had thought that not having God's law would make them happy, but already they were all sad, and none of them had experienced feeling sad under God's law. Satan went to a place to think alone about his sad situation and what he should do. He went back to Jesus and said that he wanted to change and serve God again. Jesus felt sorry for Satan and cried as he told him that he could never come back to heaven. Satan was sorry for the wrong reasons. He was sorry because of his suffering, not because he felt bad about doing wrong. So if he went back into heaven, his suffering would end, but he would go against God again. so not getting back into heaven increased his anger and hatred to God. All of Satan's angels asked him what they should do. He said that if they caused Adam and Eve to sin, then God would find a way for Adam and Eve's sins to be forgiven, and whatever way he finds to forgive Adam and Eve's sins, all of Satan's angels could also use to have their sins forgiven. That way they could go back into heaven. Satan said that tempting Adam and Eve was such an important job that he should do it himself. He thought about whether he really wanted to do it because he felt sorry for Adam and Eve, that they would be so unhappy after they sin. He thought about trying to turn them against Jesus or intimidating him with his power, but felt that deceiving them was the most likely to succeed.
Snakes used to have wings and they were able to fly. Satan went inside a snake and took control. He then went into Eden and started eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Eve was alone, and she went to look at the fruit on the forbidden tree. She saw that it looked very tasty, and wondered why God had told her not to eat it. Just as she was thinking this, the snake spoke. Eve was surprised hearing a snake able to talk, and the snake told her that the fruit had given him this power, and that God had lied about dying if you eat the fruit. The snake told her that if she ate the fruit, she would gain a secret knowledge. God didn't want Adam and Eve to know or experience evil. There would have been no need for this. They could have been perfectly happy without this knowledge. Knowing evil has not increased our happiness, but caused a lot of misery in the world. Eve didn't realize that the snake was Satan, so she believed him and ate the fruit. She then looked for Adam, who immediately understood what had happened and that the snake was Satan. Adam felt sorry for Eve, and he chose to eat the fruit and die with her, rather than be without her. God had given Adam and Eve the free will to follow and trust him, or to go their own way. Straight after eating the fruit, they felt powerful, superior to how they were. Then they felt guilt and fear and unhappiness. God's light that covered their bodies went away, and they felt naked. Everyone in heaven heard what had happened, and was sad. God visited Adam and Eve, and told them that they would have punishment on earth. The world would be a difficult place for them now. Humans would have to work and experience unhappiness, illness, aging, and death. God gave them the clothes made of animal skins. This was to cover their nakedness, and this shows the sacrifice that Jesus would later perform permanently to remove and cover all of man's sins. Heaven was worried about the humans, and Jesus and the Father discussed what they could do. And afterwards they told the angels that they had worked out a way to save them. He told them that he would become a human and sacrifice himself so that humans could live in happiness without evil again. The angels were concerned for the suffering Jesus would endure, but they celebrated that humans would be saved. Satan also celebrated, because he thought that when Jesus became human, he wouldn't have the strength of being a god, so Satan could stop him from achieving what he needs to save the humans. God's angels told Adam and Eve that Jesus had felt so sorry for them that he would take their punishment and save them by dying for them. Jesus created a door of hope from Satan's control. Humans must choose to accept the gift that Jesus offers. Adam and Eve felt bad about Jesus doing this, and they saw how important the law of God must be for him to do this. Adam was told about how the world would continue to break God's law, and the pain and suffering that would increase through the generations because of this. Adam was told how the world would continue to break God's law, and the pain and suffering would increase through the generations because of this. Adam was made perfect, healthy, without any diseases or imperfections. This will not be the case after thousands of years of breaking God's law. Jesus' sacrifice could save the whole world, but only a few would accept the gift. They would prefer to feel free from his law than repentance and obedience. This sacrifice is so infinitely valuable that anyone who accepts it would become more precious than gold. When Adam made offerings for sin, it was very difficult. He had never seen death before. The sacrifice is supposed to help Adam understand sin, to make him see how awful sin is, that death is required. Whenever Adam sacrificed an animal, he was to think about the sacrifice that Jesus will do for him, the sacrifice that will save him.
Cain and Abel were Adam and Eve's sons. Abel respected God, whilst Cain was annoyed with God because of the curse from eating the forbidden fruit. God had told them to sacrifice animals to show their acceptance of Jesus' sacrifice and their desire to follow his law. Cain brought his offering to God, annoyed at the situation he was in. He didn't strictly follow the plan of sacrificing a lamb. God had said that only the sacrifice of an animal can represent Jesus' death, and Cain only brought fruit. Abel advised Cain to sacrifice an animal. Cain was the older brother and wouldn't listen to Abel, and gave God the fruit, but God didn't accept it. Cain saw that Abel's offering was accepted and became so angry and jealous that he murdered Abel. Cain and Abel represent the two types of people. Cain represents non-Christians, or Christians that don't want to follow him in the way God wants. They will be jealous of people that follow God and will bully, tease, and kill them. Adam lived for hundreds of years and saw a generation become more and more corrupt, and the beauty of the world slowly fade. Adam and Eve had a son called Seth, who like Abel wanted to follow God. Seth had a great-great-great-grandson called Enoch. A person's character depends on who they choose to be, but it is also affected by upbringing. Cain's children chose not to follow God, not because they had genes inherited from Cain, but because of how Cain had brought them up. Seth brought up Enoch to follow God and his law. Enoch chose not to spend time with unbelievers, because he felt that spending time with them he might join in with their evil. He spent much of his time alone, thinking and praying. Enoch was worried about death. It seemed that all people would just stop existing. God showed him that Jesus would die to save the dead that wanted to follow him. He also saw the evil that would be when the world comes to an end. Enoch warned people about what he had been told. Some believed his words, worshipped God, and stopped breaking his law. God didn't want Enoch to experience death, so he lifted him up and took him directly to heaven. God showed the world that people who follow him would be rewarded and treated with respect. He wanted people to have hope, but also to understand that those who don't follow him will have to die. Satan has successfully brought a lot of evil into the world. Enoch separating himself from Satan's people and spending lots of time in prayer represents what God's people will do in the last days of the world, because it has become so evil. At the end of the world, God's people will not die, but will be lifted up to heaven just before the world is destroyed. Enoch was lifted to heaven just before the world was destroyed by a ginormous flood.
Seth's children were called the sons of God because they were brought up to follow God. Cain's children were called the sons of men because they did whatever they wanted to do. The two groups mixed and married each other, and this caused Seth's family to stop following God and his law. Noah and his family were among the few that still followed God. God wanted people to be saved and have happiness by following him, but because the world was so evil, almost everyone was brought up and taught not to want to follow him. To save people, God saw that he could destroy the whole world apart from the small number that still followed him. These people could then raise children in a way that they would choose to follow the law, choose to have eternal life and happiness. For the sake of saving the most people, God decided to destroy all the evil in the world with a flood. God told Noah about the flood and to tell the whole world what was going to happen. God wanted people to listen to Noah and save themselves from the flood. Enoch's son Methuselah helped his grandson Noah to build the ark, but he died just before the flood started. The rest of the world didn't believe Noah and made fun of him for being a fanatic and building a boat. Some people did listen to Noah, but there was over 100 years until the flood came, and during that time they gave up and started living their lives of sin without God again. Angels brought animals onto the ark, 7 pairs of each animal that can be eaten, called clean animals, and 1 pair of each animal that can't be eaten, called unclean animals. Other people ignored all this and continued getting drunk and chatting and watching entertainment that had no mention of God. An angel closed the door of the boat, with Noah and the 7 members of his family inside. 7 days later, it started raining. The rain was immense,
and rocks in the earth split, opening ginormous volumes of underground water. This destroyed everything on earth, including the false religions and idols that people had built to create false gods. The destruction was so strong that even Satan thought he might die. Lots of people saw what was happening and begged for Noah to let him into the boat. It was too late. When the world comes to an end, it will be too late to change. Your chance to follow God is now. The storm lasted 40 days, and then the world was completely covered with water. Gradually the water went down, and then they left the boat. Noah immediately built an altar and sacrificed one of each of the clean animals. This showed he accepted Jesus' future sacrifice and thanked God for keeping his family safe on the boat. God was very pleased with the thanks Noah had given him, and he blessed Noah and his family. God created rainbows as a sign of what had happened, that the whole world was destroyed by water, but that God still loved the people in the world, and he would never destroy it with water again. At the end of the world, it will be destroyed by fire.
While some of Noah's descendants followed God, some didn't and were angry with God for causing the flood. Others either didn't believe in the flood or said it was from natural causes. Those who didn't follow God felt guilty when they saw the holy lives of those who loved and obeyed him. They didn't like feeling this, so they all moved to a new city. They built a tower incredibly tall to look powerful, and so people would look up to them and obey them. From here, Satan ruled the whole world. Before it was finished, people lived in the tower in posh, beautiful rooms decorated with idols. The tower was to impress people, thoughts that they instead should have had for God. God was concerned that this city and tower made it difficult for people to focus on Jesus' sacrifice they needed to get into heaven. The world was all in one city and ruled by a system set up by Satan. God ended this by making all the people understand and speak different languages. Not understanding each other meant that they couldn't finish building the tower, and they all moved to different parts of the world. God also caused lightning to destroy the top of the tower to show people that nothing is higher than him.
People spread across the world, but false religion continued. God wanted to pick someone to make an example of devoting their life to God, so that people who follow God could see how to live. God picked Abraham and told him to leave his country and separate from his people who have chosen not to follow God. God tells us that Christians are now the ones who follow Abraham's example. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Abraham was respected by the people in his country because they saw his strict obedience to God. This made people respect the God that Abraham followed. They saw the strength of the God he followed and the importance, power and love he must have for Abraham to choose to follow him so well. God told Abraham that the people who will continue to follow his God would be as numerous as the stars. God gave Abraham an area of land to live on, and God said that this land will be given to God's followers when heaven is brought to earth at the end of the world. God told Abraham that he will have many descendants that will follow God. Abraham was confused because he didn't have any children and his wife seemed too old to get pregnant. Abraham and his wife Sarah didn't trust God enough. God wanted to test how much they trusted him by promising something that looked impossible. Instead of believing God and letting him do the work, they tried to do it themselves. Sarah advised Abraham to marry their servant Hagar and get her pregnant. God never wanted men to have more than one wife. Lamech was the first person to have 2 wives, which created jealousy and unhappiness in his family. People started copying Lamech, and this continued after the flood. Even some of God's followers did this. God picked Noah because he was different to other people in the world. Noah only had 1 wife. Hagar became very proud, thinking that she was the mother of God's people. She boasted about it to Sarah, and Sarah became very jealous and unhappy. Hagar and Abraham had a son called Ishmael. God had told Abraham that God's followers would be through a son he would have with Sarah. Sarah, however, had said that she would count Ishmael as her son, so Abraham assumed that God's people would be through Ishmael. Angels, however, came again and told Abraham clearly that Sarah would have a son, and he would be called Isaac. Isaac was born, and Abraham and Sarah celebrated. This caused Hagar and Ishmael to be very jealous, because Ishmael thought he would be the father of God's people. Because of this, Ishmael didn't like Isaac, and he wasn't nice to him. Sarah saw this and wanted Abraham to tell Ishmael and Hagar to leave. Abraham felt bad, but God told him that this was the only way for his family to be happy, and that God would look after Ishmael, and he would be successful and have lots of descendants. God told Abraham to send away Hagar and Ishmael to teach us that marriage is extremely important, and that big sacrifices sometimes have to be made for happiness in the marriage. Sarah was the first and only true wife of Abraham. She was entitled to rights as a wife and a mother which no other person could have. Abraham failed the test of trusting God by marrying Hagar. Because he failed, God set up an even more difficult test. God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on a hill. Abraham took Isaac to the hill the next morning. It took 3 days to get there, so Abraham had enough time to think about it, doubt God, and change his mind. But he trusted God, that Isaac would be the father of God's people. He had seen that God was right saying that Sarah would have a baby even though she was so old, and he assumed God would make Isaac come back to life after Abraham had killed him. Abraham made sure he was alone on the hill to make sure no one would stop him from killing his son. Abraham hadn't told Isaac what he was going to do, and as they went up the hill with wood for the sacrifice, Isaac asked Abraham where the lamb was that they would kill. Abraham said that God would provide a lamb. Abraham told Isaac about the promise of him producing many descendants, and that he would sacrifice Isaac, but then God would bring him back to life. Isaac believed in God and loved and respected him. He knew his dad followed this God and had been taught to obey his dad. He could have stopped his dad if he wanted, but he hugged Abraham and agreed to follow his plan. As Abraham lifted his hand to kill his son, an angel told him to stop. He told him that he'd passed the test to show that he'd trusted God by being willing to sacrifice his son, his only son. God blessed him for this and gave Abraham a ram to sacrifice to represent God's son, his only son.
God told his people not to marry the Canaanites because they worshipped idols, and God's people would be at risk of copying them if they were married. Abraham was worried about his son Isaac being corrupted by the Canaanites, and that he should marry someone that wouldn't damage his relationship with God. Abraham was old and knew he didn't have much longer to live. Isaac wasn't married yet, so he made his servant promise to find Isaac a suitable wife. The servant promised to find a wife who followed the same God as Abraham, the only real God. The servant went to the city Abraham originally came from to look for a wife for Isaac. He prayed for God to help him to find someone suitable by showing him evidence when he sees her. The servant went to the well in the city where there were a lot of people. There he noticed a girl with good manners called Rebecca. The servant saw the evidence he had asked God to show, that Rebecca was the one that God was pleased for Isaac to marry. Rebecca invited the servant to her father's house. The servant then told Rebecca's father and brother that God had shown him signs that Rebecca should marry his master's son Isaac. Abraham's servant then asked the family whether they were happy for Rebecca to marry Isaac. They answered that they were happy with it because God is happy with it. The servant bowed and worshipped God for this. They asked Rebecca whether she was willing to go with the servant the long journey to marry Isaac. She was happy to do this because she believed God has chosen her to marry Isaac. In those days, marriage was decided by the parents but the children still had to agree to it. Generally, the children had confidence in their parents' judgment and followed their decision. Isaac had been brought up to obey God, and when he was 40, he agreed to marry the wife the servant found because he believed God had chosen her, and he trusted God. God tells us about Isaac's life so that we can use it in an example of how we should obey God. It also teaches us to bring up children, to respect parents' decisions, to marry more suitable people than their inexpertise might pick.
God knows the future. He knew before Isaac's children, Jacob and Esau, were born, what characters they would each develop. He knew that Esau wouldn't obey him. God told Rebekah that she would have 2 children, and that the older one would serve the younger. He told her that each son would create a nation, and the younger son's country would be greater than the older one's. Isaac loved Esau more than Jacob, because Esau would hunt and bring him wild meat to eat. Rebekah preferred Jacob because he was calmer and made sure that his mum was happy. Rebekah told Jacob that Esau would serve him. Jacob thought that because he was the younger brother, the promise of being the father of God's people would go to Esau. One day Esau was very hungry, and Jacob offered him some food if Esau would give the promise of being the father of God's people to him. Esau didn't take the promise from God very seriously, so he agreed that Jacob could have it. Esau married 2 women who worshipped false gods. This caused Isaac and Rebekah a lot of stress. Even so, Isaac still loved Esau more than Jacob, and when Isaac thought that he was about to die, he asked Esau to bring him some meat, so that he could bless Esau with the promise God had given him. Esau did not tell his father that he had sold his birthright to Jacob. Rebekah remembered what God had told her, and knew that Esau had given the promise to Jacob. She persuaded Jacob to trick his dad by pretending to be Esau, so that he would get the blessing from his dad instead. Rebekah didn't think there was another way to do this, and he knew Isaac preferred Esau, so thought that he would definitely give the blessing to him. Rebekah and Jacob showed a lack of trust in God, just as Abraham had with the promised birth of Isaac. Jacob, trying to buy the promise and trick his dad, was wrong and unnecessary. God had told him he would be the father of his people, so he should have trusted God and allowed God to make sure it would happen. If Esau had got the blessing from Abraham, it would only have actually benefited him if he had a good relationship with God. If he loved and respected God, God would bless him. If he had no respect for God or his commandments, God would have rejected him. If Jacob hadn't got the blessing from Abraham, but he still loved God, God would have still blessed him as if Isaac had given him the blessing. Rebekah was bitterly sorry for what she had got Jacob to do. Because Jacob had done this, he had to run away because he thought that Esau would kill him. Rebekah never saw Jacob again. Jacob went to where his mum Rebekah had originally come from. He met his mum's brother, Laban, and wanted to marry his daughter, called Rachel. He made an agreement with Laban that in return for working for him for 7 years, he would get to marry Rachel. At the end of the 7 years, Laban wanted Jacob to work for him even longer, so he tricked Jacob into marrying his other daughter, called Leah, so that he would have to work another 7 years to marry Rachel. Jacob wanted to separate from Leah, but Laban told him that this would be very embarrassing for the family and not nice for Leah, so he agreed to marry both Leah and Rachel and work another 7 years for Laban. Although he married both women, he always loved Rachel much more than Leah. Laban was selfish, getting as much as he could out of Jacob for 20 years. Jacob wouldn't have stayed with Laban so long if he wasn't afraid of encountering Esau. However, he heard Laban's sons complaining that Jacob had taken a lot of Laban's wealth and that Laban attributed his success to Jacob and not to them. Laban became unhappy with Jacob and tried to pay him less money by tricking him. Jacob realized it was best for him to leave. Jacob was distressed because he didn't know where he was going to go. He prayed and God told him to go back to the area he grew up. Jacob told Leah and Rachel how Laban had been unfair to him. They were angry that Laban had used their money. Laban was angry when he found out that Jacob and his daughters had left. He went after them to bring them back, but God gave Laban a dream where he told Laban to let Jacob go. Laban still caught up with Jacob, and Jacob complained how he had mistreated them. Laban made an agreement that they wouldn't hurt each other. Laban said he cared for his daughters and grandchildren and didn't want Jacob to marry any more women. Jacob agreed to this. Jacob then went on his way back to his childhood home. He had a dream where he saw angels. He asked the angels in the dream to give a humble message to Esau to try and reconcile and make up with him. The angels went away and came back and said that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. This made Jacob terrified, and he split the group he was with into two, so that if Esau tries to kill him, he will only see and kill half of the group. Jacob prayed and remembered that God had told him to return home, that God would look after him if he went back and make him the father of many people. He trusted God with what he had told him, and he asked God to protect him from Esau.
Jacob was worried because he knew he had sinned by stealing Esau's birthright, so he thought God might find it just to let Esau kill him. He prayed to God all night about this. An angel stood in front of Jacob and showed him exactly how he was wrong in what he did. As the angel turned to leave him, Jacob grabbed the angel and refused to let go. He cried and begged that he was deeply sorry for what he had done to Esau, the sin that had caused him not to see his family for over 20 years. All night Jacob wrestled with the angel, begging for the angel to bless him. The angel seemed to be resisting his prayer by continually reminding him of his sins and trying to get away. Jacob wasn't holding the angel by physical strength, but by the power of faith. The angel was more than strong enough to break free, but chose not to. The angel warned Jacob that he had supernatural power he could use against him, but Jacob still wouldn't let go, so he dislocated Jacob's hip. But even with all the hip pain, Jacob still wouldn't let go, and he tried even harder to get a blessing. The sun was coming up, and finally the angel asked what Jacob's name was, and said he was changing his name to Israel, because he struggled with God, repenting and pleading for forgiveness and a blessing. And he succeeded. The name Israel means Prince of God. Jacob showed that he had faith that persevered through even the difficulty of a dislocated hip. Jacob named the place he struggled with the angel Peniel, which means face of God, because he had seen God face to face and survived. This is because the angel he fought with was Jesus, God himself. In Hosea 12:4 and 5, we have confirmation again that this angel was God. Before the wrestling, Jacob had spent his life in remorse for what he had done. The blessing from the angel gave him peace from this, that he had been forgiven, and God was with him. Esau's army had come to kill Jacob, but God listened to Jacob's pleadings, and Esau had a dream. Esau was shown how sorry Jacob was, and that God was with Jacob. When Esau woke up, he had no desire to hurt Jacob, so told his army that God was with Jacob, and they would meet him, but no one was allowed to hurt him. When Esau arrived, Jacob bowed down to him 7 times. Esau ran up to Jacob and hugged him. Jacob gave Esau a peace offering. Like Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau represent 2 types of people. Jacob, the followers of God, and Esau, the wicked. Jacob's fear when he found out that Esau and 400 men were coming to kill him represents the fear the Christians will have in the last days of the world, just before Jesus returns, when a law is made to put them all to death. As the people who don't follow God gather around us, we will be filled with fear, because, like Jacob, we won't see a way to escape, a way to survive. The angel placed himself before Jacob, and he grabbed the angel and held him and wrestled with him all night. So will the Christians. In our time of trouble, at the end, we will wrestle with God in prayer. Jacob in his distress prayed all night for protection from Esau. The Christians in their mental torment will cry to God day and night for protection from the wicked who surround them. Jacob felt unworthy, just as God's people at the end will plead and feel unworthy. Like Jacob, they will plead the promises God gives to dependent, helpless, and repenting sinners. The angel reminded Jacob of his sins and tried to escape from him. This was to test Jacob. At the end, when God's people are in their time of trouble, they will also be tested, so that they show strength in their faith, the perseverance and confidence in the power of God to protect and save them. As they look at the many sins they have done in their lives, they will feel like giving up. But then they remember that it's a matter of life or death, and they will desperately cry to God with repentance and beg Him for forgiveness. Then they will refer to His promise. Let Him take hold of my strength, that He may make peace with me, and He shall make peace with me. In Isaiah 27:5. And they will pray day and night. God would have not listened to Jacob and saved his life if he hadn't repented of stealing Esau's blessing. Today we have little fear of death and for our souls. Because of this, we hide and continue some sins. At the end, when the Christians are in mental anguish, in terror for their lives, knowing God would only save those who repent of every sin, they will not hide anything. Because if they did, they would be completely overwhelmed, knowing God will judge them guilty for any sins they kept in secret. The period of probation is the time now that we have to repent of our hidden sins. When the door of Noah's Ark closed and the storm started, people wanted to enter, but it was too late. Probation, the time when it was still possible to get into the ark, had ended and no one outside could be saved. When probation ends for us and we see Jesus returning, it will be too late to confess secret sins. All who want God's blessing and trust God's promises and are persevering as Jacob was, will succeed. Not many Christians right now see and behave in a way that shows they understand the importance of the way they must follow God. Few agonize before God, pray long prayers earnestly for the blessing, so most don't receive it. Their faith, which will get people through the time of trouble, must be practiced every day right now, or we will be completely unprepared to succeed in the time of trouble.
Joseph listened to his dad and followed God. He was more obedient to God than his brothers. Joseph valued the teachings highly, and he loved following God. He was upset when he saw his brothers doing things against God, and carefully and gently he tried to get them to change. The brothers were jealous of Joseph, because Jacob loved Joseph, because he loved God so strongly. Joseph hated sin so much and wanted his brothers to change, so he told Jacob what his brothers were doing. This, however, made their jealousy of Joseph turn into hate. An angel gave Joseph 2 dreams, where his family bowed down to him. He told his brothers about the dreams, and they were angry with Joseph for thinking he was superior to them. Joseph's brothers thought Joseph's dreams might come true, so to stop this from happening, they discussed killing him, but then they decided to sell him as a slave. However, God overruled their plan, and despite the brothers doing this, God made the dream come true. Joseph was sold and taken to Egypt. God went with Joseph to Egypt, and angels prepared it so that Joseph would be comfortable there. A man who worked for Pharaoh called Potiphar bought Joseph. God ensured Joseph was successful in everything he did, so Potiphar was very pleased with him, and he trusted Joseph. When Joseph was tempted by Potiphar's wife to break the commandments and to do something against Potiphar, he refused. Joseph told her the blessing that God gives from following him. He would not break Potiphar's trust or sin against God even because of her threats. When she falsely accused him of doing something wrong, he didn't worry. He knew that he hadn't done anything wrong, and he trusted God would always help him. He was thrown into prison, but God turned these bad things into a blessing. He made Joseph popular with the prison guard, and he was put in charge of all the other prisoners. This is an example to everyone. Although we are tempted to do bad things, We should remember that God is always available and willing to help us to do the right thing. If you fear God, He will be a shield. God allowed Joseph to suffer by being put in prison to prepare him for an important job. Joseph didn't forget God, even though he was a ruler over the whole of Egypt. He was a foreigner and was often sad, thinking about his home and his family, but he believed God had guided him to become successful in Egypt, and he worked hard at his job and for God. Joseph walked with God. Even when he was persuaded or threatened to sin, he wouldn't. He is an example of how we should live. When Joseph's brothers admitted to their sin, Joseph forgave them, and he was nice to them, showing that he didn't have any resentment at all. At this point, the Israelites weren't slaves to the Egyptians. A lot of the Egyptians had sold their belongings and themselves to Pharaoh for food, making themselves slaves. The Israelites hadn't done this, and they were allowed to live in a particular area of Egypt because of what Joseph had done for Egypt, especially by getting them through the famine. Joseph put his family in the best land, the land of Ramesses. Pharaoh allowed Joseph to give his family lots of food, and Pharaoh didn't make them pay any taxes, and he told the Egyptians that they should do this because whilst all the nations around Egypt were suffering from famine, Joseph had ensured that Egypt had lots of food. Pharaoh said the Egyptians were indebted to Joseph's God. Over the years, after Joseph died, the Israelites were very successful, and their population grew so that there were more Israelites than Egyptians in Egypt. A new Pharaoh saw this and was concerned that the Israelites were a powerful group and could join with Egypt's enemies and destroy the Egyptians. He wanted to get the Israelites out of Egypt, but found out that they were very useful workers for Egypt, and it would be better to keep them. So instead, he turned them into slaves and forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses. But the more work Pharaoh forced them to do, the more the population grew. They responded by giving them even more work. They forced the women to work on farms, but still their population grew. Pharaoh was angry that forcing them to do more and more and more work was not succeeding in reducing their numbers, so he ordered that male children should be killed as soon as they are born. Satan had organized this. He knew that a boy would be born to deliver the Israelites from Egypt back to Israel, and so he wanted to kill this boy to stop this from happening. The women feared God more than Pharaoh, so didn't kill the boys. God blessed them for this. However, Pharaoh found out that they weren't killing their sons, and he got angry, and he ordered all of his people to watch and make sure that all the Israelites' males were thrown into a river. When this cruel law was in place, Moses was born. His mother hid him as long as she could with any safety, and then made a little boat from reeds and placed it at the edge of the water, while his sister subtly stayed close to the boat to see what would happen. Angels were also watching, making sure that Moses wasn't hurt, because his mum had committed him to God's care with earnest prayers and tears. And these angels led Pharaoh's daughter to the river. She saw the strange little boat and sent one of her maids to fetch it. And when she saw Moses crying inside, she felt sorry for him. She knew that a Hebrew mum had done this to try and save the baby, and Pharaoh's daughter immediately decided that she would make him her son. Moses' sister came up to Pharaoh's daughter and asked whether she wanted her to find an Israelite nurse to nurse the baby for her, and Pharaoh's daughter agreed. Moses' sister rushed to her mum and brought her to Pharaoh's daughter, and Moses was handed back to her mum with money to help her to nurse him. She was happy and confident that God had protected Moses, and she worked hard to educate him well because she was certain that God had saved him for important work. She taught him to fear God and love truth and justice. She prayed that God would protect him from things that would corrupt his character. She taught him to bow and pray to God, for he alone could hear him and help him in an emergency. She taught him how sinful idolatry was. She knew that when he became 12, she would have to hand him over to Pharaoh's daughter, so she had to teach him well, especially knowing that in Pharaoh's family, everything around him is designed to make him forget about the true God. The teachings stopped him becoming proud and sinful. Here Satan was defeated.
By encouraging Pharaoh to kill the male children, he thought he would stop God's purposes by killing one whom God had planned to deliver his people. But the very law to kill the Israelite boys was the means that God used to overrule Satan, to place Moses in the royal family, where he had advantages to become educated and qualified to lead his people from Egypt. Pharaoh expected to have Moses become his replacement. He educated him to lead Egypt's armies. Moses was a great favourite with Pharaoh and was respected because he led battles with superior skill and wisdom. The Egyptians thought Moses was remarkable. Angels told Moses that God had chosen him to deliver the Israelites. The Israelite rulers were also taught by angels that the time for deliverance was close, and that Moses was the man that God would use to do this. Moses thought that they would be delivered by war, and that he would stand at the head of the Israelite army. Thinking this, Moses guarded his affections for his adopted mother and Pharaoh, in case it would be difficult for him to do what God wanted against them. God protected Moses from being corrupted by the influences around him. He never forgot the principles his mum had taught him, and he loved God and the Israelites so much that he didn't hide his ethnicity to become a royal heir. When Moses was 40, he was looking at the burdens his people had, and he saw an Egyptian hitting an Israelite. Moses checked that no one was around him, and then he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. The next day he saw 2 Israelites fighting, and he asked them why they were doing this. They angrily asked Moses what made him think that he was their judge, and whether he was going to kill them like the guy he killed yesterday. Moses was shocked and scared. He realized people knew that he had killed the Egyptian. When Pharaoh heard about this, he tried to have Moses killed. Moses escaped from Pharaoh by going to Midian. God led Moses there, to live with a man called Jethro, a man who worshipped God. He was a shepherd and a priest, and he let Moses work for him, looking after his animals. Later he married Jethro's daughter, and he ended up living in Midian for 40 years. Moses was wrong to kill the Egyptian. He thought that the Israelites knew that God had brought him up to free them from the Egyptians, and that he would free them by fighting. But God hadn't decided to free them by war, but by his own power, so that people would ascribe the deliverance to God alone. Moses wouldn't have been ready to go straight from Pharaoh's court and all the indulgences he had to then lead the Israelites back to Israel. God organized it so that he would have time learning from living in poverty and difficulties. God sent his angels to tell him about the future. Here he learned the great lesson of self-control and humility. While he worked as a humble shepherd, God was preparing him to become the spiritual shepherd of his sheep, the Israelites. As Moses led Jethro's animals to the desert, he came to Mount Sinai. Here God appeared to Moses from a bush that was on fire. God told him that he had seen the Israelites' difficulties, and he has come to deliver them from this, to bring them back to Israel. God told Moses to go to Pharaoh to free his people. The time had fully come where God would have Moses exchange the shepherd's staff for the rod of God, which he would make powerful in performing signs and wonders, in freeing him from oppression, and in protecting them from their enemies. Moses agreed to the mission. God reassured Moses that the men that wanted to kill him are all dead.
Jacob's descendants spent many years working as the Egyptian servants. Only a few families went down into Egypt originally, but they had multiplied into a large population. They were surrounded with Egyptian idols and false religions, and this caused many of them to forget about the real God and his law. And they copied the Egyptians in worshipping the sun, moon, stars, and animals and man-made images. Everything around them was designed by Satan to make them forget about God. However, there were still people who made sure they didn't forget God and were sad to see the others joining the Egyptian religion. They cried to God to deliver them from slavery and to bring them out of Egypt so that they weren't surrounded by all the idolatry and the corrupting influences. But many of Jacob's descendants were happy to stay as servants in Egypt rather than go on a difficult journey to Israel. Because of this, God didn't deliver them after the first plague. He showed how cruel Pharaoh was by allowing Pharaoh to not listen to and oppress them until the 10 plagues had occurred. This would also show them how much stronger God is than Pharaoh, so that they would be anxious to leave Egypt and choose to follow God. God's followers had told the Egyptians about the only true God and showed them the evidence for him. The Egyptians tried to destroy their religion by threats, cruel treatments, and promises of rewards, but were unsuccessful. This made the Egyptians angry. The last two pharaohs treated them cruelly. People encouraged each other by referring to the promise made to Abraham and that Joseph had told them that God would bring them back to Israel. Some would listen and believe, but others looked at their own sad condition and felt no hope. The Egyptians had heard that the Israelites expected to go back to Israel, and they made fun of them, saying that their God was weak. They pointed out that they were a nation of slaves, and teasingly said to them, "If your God is so just and caring, and has more power than the Egyptian gods, then why doesn't he show how powerful he is and free you from being slaves? You say our gods are false, but they have made us rich, and they gave us all of you to be our servants. They have given us authority and power over you. We have the power to oppress you and destroy you, so that there are none of you left." They derided the idea that the Hebrews would ever be delivered from slavery. Pharaoh boasted that he would like to see their God deliver them from his hands. This destroyed the hope that many Israelites had. They knew that despite believing and worshipping the true God, their lives were a burden as slaves for Egypt. On the other hand, the Egyptians worshipped fake gods with no power, such as wooden or stone idols and the sun, moon, and stars. Despite this, they had much better lives. Some Israelites thought that if God really was more powerful than all other gods, then they wouldn't be in this sorry state. Some Israelites thought that if God really was more powerful than all other gods, then they wouldn't be in this sorry state. He still didn't free the Israelites, so God sent a plague of locusts. Despite seeing his whole kingdom judged guilty by God and under dreadful plagues, Pharaoh chose to receive the plagues rather than submit to God. God then sent darkness on Egypt. It wasn't just dark, but the air was very oppressive, so the breathing was difficult. But the Israelites had pure air and light. Moses and his brother Aaron told Pharaoh what the plagues would be and when they would come. It was very hard for Pharaoh and the proud, idol-worshipping Egyptians to listen to God. Pharaoh gave in to what God was requiring, very slowly. First, he would only allow them to sacrifice to God in Egypt. Then, after Egypt had suffered some of the plagues, he allowed men to be free. After Egypt had been nearly destroyed by the plagues of the locust, he allowed all of them to go, but not their animals. When he was suffering badly from the plagues, he would give in a little, but when the suffering ended, he would take back everything he had agreed to. This is just as when Satan had asked for forgiveness and to go back into heaven when he was suffering on earth. If he had gone back to heaven, his suffering would have ended, and he would not feel bad about sinning again. True repentance should exist even without suffering. This is why, with Pharaoh, many plagues were needed for him to let the Israelites go. It was Pharaoh and the idolatrous priests who refused to let the Israelites go before the last plague. The rest of the Egyptians wanted to let the Israelites go. Moses then told Pharaoh that the angel of God would kill the firstborn children. The last plague was the most severe. But Pharaoh was extremely angry and wouldn't humble himself. The Egyptians ridiculed the Israelites for putting lamb blood on their doors. This blood protected the Israelites from death, just as Jesus' blood can protect us from the death that our sin requires.
At midnight, God killed all of Egypt's firstborn children, including Pharaoh's son that sat on his throne, and all the firstborn cattle. A great cry was heard as Pharaoh, his servants, and all the Egyptians got up in the night and saw the death. There was at least one person dead in every Egyptian household. Because of this, Pharaoh finally gave up fighting and told Moses and Aaron to leave with the Israelites and their cattle and go and serve their God. The Egyptians told them to leave quickly because they were worried that otherwise God might kill all of them. The Egyptians gave the Israelites jewels and gold, and the Israelites quickly left. God led them in a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night, so that they had light all the time. He made sure not to lead the Israelites through Philistia.
God knew that the Philistines wouldn't allow them passing through their land. The Philistines would make war with the Israelites, saying that they had run away from their Egyptian masters. Therefore, God, by bringing them the way of the sea, revealed himself to be compassionate, as well as a God of judgment. God informed Moses that Pharaoh would chase them, and he directed Moses just where by the sea he should camp. He told Moses that God would be honored before Pharaoh and all his army. After the Israelites had been gone several days, the Egyptians told Pharaoh that they had fled and they would never return to work for them again. This made the Egyptians regret letting the Israelites leave. Despite all the plagues they had suffered, they were so hardened by their continual rebellion that they decided to chase the Israelites and force them to come back to Egypt. Pharaoh took a large army with 600 chariots and went after them, and he overtook them where they were camped by the sea. When Pharaoh had nearly caught up with them, the Israelites saw the Egyptians camped near them and were terrified. They cried to God and asked Moses why he had brought them to the desert just to die, saying that they had wished they had stayed in Egypt, serving the Egyptians as slaves, rather than dying in the middle of nowhere. Moses told them not to be scared, because God will save all of them. He will fight the Egyptians and make sure that the Israelites never see them again. How quickly the Israelites distrusted God. They had seen the miracle of the 10 plagues God had sent to free them, but when their confidence in God was tested, they complained. Instead of trusting that God would save them, they complained to Moses, accusing him of being the cause of all their likely deaths. Moses encouraged them to trust God and to wait to see what the Lord would do for them. Moses earnestly cried to God to save his people. God asked Moses why he was so worried. He told Moses to lift up the shepherd's rod he was holding and stretch his hand over the sea, and then God will separate the water and create a dry passage in the middle. God told Moses that when the Israelites need something, God will provide it. It was night time, and the angel of God and the pillar of cloud that was leading the Israelites went and stood behind them, so that the angel was in between them and the Egyptians. To the Egyptians it was a cloud of darkness, and to the Israelites it was a cloud of light. Because of this, the Egyptians couldn't see the Israelites and didn't approach them. This was another sign of love for the Israelites to learn to trust God. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God caused a strong wind to separate the sea and create a dry path in the middle. The Israelites walked along this throughout the night, with the Egyptians unable to see them due to the cloud of darkness. The Egyptian army was celebrating throughout that night that the Israelites had no way to escape because of the Red Sea. In the morning, as they came up to the sea, they found the dry path with walls of water on each side, and the Israelites were halfway through. The Egyptians waited a while to decide what they should do. They were disappointed and angry that they thought they had caught the Israelites, but they had used this unexpected path. They decided to follow them. The whole army followed them and was in the middle of the sea. God looked at the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and the cloud, and God's angels removed their chariot wheels, so that they progressed very slowly along the path. The army remembered the plagues that God had sent, and they decided that God was fighting for the Israelites, and that unless they went back to Egypt, God would kill them all. The army was terrified and were turning round when God told Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea, so that the waters would crash down on the Egyptians. Moses did this, and the whole Egyptian army was killed. The Israelites were protected and made it to the other side. The Israelites saw the Egyptians' dead bodies on the shore and feared and believed God and his servant Moses. They all sang, praising God for what he had done for them.
God's people are called Zion. In Isaiah 51:16, it says, "Zion, thou art my people." God also describes his church as a woman. We can see that in Jeremiah 6:2. "I have likened thy daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman." And the Bible tells us that before the end of the world, God's people will have a period of time in the wilderness. Revelation 12:6 says, "Then the women fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there for 1,260 days. As Christians, we will have a wilderness experience just as the Israelites had. It is useful to see what happened to see how it will be for the church. The Israelites traveled in the desert for 3 days, and the only water they found was undrinkable. They complained to Moses about their thirst. Moses prayed, and God showed him a tree to put into the water. When Moses did this, the water was made sweet. There God made an agreement with them that if they listened to him, do what's right in God's eyes, follow the commandments and statutes, then they would not get any of the diseases the Egyptians suffered from. The Israelites were wrong to choose not to trust that God would provide them water. They were unwilling to endure difficult times in the desert. When there was a difficulty, they would see them as impossibilities. They would lose confidence in God and they would think that they would die. The Israelites complained to Moses and his brother Aaron about hunger, saying that because they had followed God into the desert, they would die, so they would have been better off staying in Egypt than dying of hunger in the desert. But they had not really suffered hunger. They had food for the present, but they feared for the future. They couldn't see how the Israelites could survive on the simple food they had. God was happy for them to only have enough food to last for the immediate future, and that there would be difficulties in the desert, so that they would turn to God and ask Him for help. If they asked Him for help, He would have showed them His love and care. However, they seemed to be unwilling to trust God more than what was already given to them. If they had true faith and confidence in Him, they would have been happy with any difficulties and suffering. God had promised that if they followed Him, He would protect them from disease, so it was wrong for them to think that they might starve and die. This is a lesson for our day. The unbelief and the complaining of the Israelites illustrates how Christians are today. We sometimes look at the Israelites in the desert and are surprised at the lack of belief and continual complaining, after God had done so much for them, showing so much evidence like parting the sea, for example. We think that they shouldn't have been so ungrateful, but sometimes we complain of things much less important, and God frequently proves us and tries our faith in small things, and we don't endure the trial any better than the Israelites did. Many have their present needs supplied, but they won't trust God for the future. Their unbelief causes them to have no hope and feel depressed. When difficulties arise and their faith and love to God are tested, they don't endure the trial and complain at the process by which God has chosen to purify them. Their love does not prove pure and perfect to bear all things. Christians' faith should be strong, active, and enduring, the result of having faith in things hoped for. If this is the case, then people would instead say things like, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless His holy name, for He has been generous with me." Some people think that self-denial is suffering. They do and eat whatever they want to. If Christians agreed to deny themselves from the things that they shouldn't be doing, many of them would give up their faith, as if living correctly would somehow cause them to die, and simple appetites would cause them to starve. Like the Israelites, they would prefer slavery, diseased bodies, and even death, rather than to be deprived of worldly amusement and food. The purpose of life isn't to make yourself as happy as possible. Follow God, and He cares more than enough for you to look after you. God only promises bread and water when Christians go through the time of trouble at the end of the world. In the morning, the Israelites found small round things on the ground. Moses told them it was bread from God and everyone should collect and eat it. However, much people collected and found out it was exactly the amount they and their families needed. Moses told them not to keep any for the next day. People should collect what they need for the day on the day. A lot of people didn't listen to Moses and stored the food, but the next morning they would find it rotten and covered in worms. This taught the Israelites to trust in God's provision. Also, bread represents Jesus, and we are to receive food from God every day. We can't rely on yesterday's relationship with God to be sufficient for today. On Fridays, they collected twice as much food and baked what they wanted to eat the next day, because Saturday is the Sabbath. The fact that the food wasn't rotten on the Sabbath morning showed the Israelites how special and holy the Sabbath is. The Israelites were ashamed of their unbelief and complaining, and promised to trust the Lord, but they soon forgot their promise and failed on the first trial of their faith. They came to an area without water and told Moses off and ordered him to give them water. They were annoyed with Moses again, that without water they would die. Moses cried to God about the Israelites' unbelief. God told Moses to go to a rock and hit it with his stick, the same one he used to part the Red Sea. When Moses hit the rock, God made water come out. The rock represents Jesus, and the hitting of the rock is the death that Jesus did to save us. God chose to put the Israelites in an area without water to test whether they would ask for help or again complain. God had deliberately showed them his power so that they would understand he gave them everything they have and could take it all away. At times the Israelites accepted this and were humble, thanking and asking God for help. But when they were hungry or thirsty, they complained to Moses as if they had come to the desert for him, and it was his fault they were thirsty. Because of their unbelief, God allowed their enemies to make war with them, so that he could show them that God is the one who provides them their strength. Esau had a grandson called Amalek, who was the leader of a tribe. He discovered and fought with the Israelites in the desert. Moses told one of his assistants, Joshua, to take a group of men to fight with Amalek. Moses, Hur, and Moses' brother Aaron went up a hill to watch the battle. Moses held up the rod of God, and when he did, Joshua and the other Israelites started winning the fight. But when Moses let his hands come down, the Amalekites started winning. Aaron and Hur helped Moses keep his arms up the whole day, signifying that if Israel trusted in God, he would fight for them and remove their enemies. But when they didn't ask for his strength, their enemies who didn't know God would be stronger than them. So being a Christian and having your trust in God makes you more powerful than your enemies. But being a Christian and not asking for God's power makes you weaker than if you didn't know God in the first place. As a Christian, Satan wants to attack you, and you will lose your faith without asking God for help.
The Israelites reached the foot of Mount Sinai, and they stayed the night there. Moses went up the mountain to talk with God. The whole mountain started shaking, and fire and smoke appeared. Angels surrounded God as he descended onto the mountain. This amazing scene was shown to the Israelites so that they would accept God's authority and that he is the only real God. God then told him his 10 commandments, which had existed before then. The angels were governed by the commandments, and God had told Adam and Eve, who told their descendants about them. And God said Abraham kept them. He obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Genesis 26:5. Sinai was the place where God wrote them down. If we look at the 10 commandments, we can see them divided into 2 parts. The first 3 represent loving God, and the last 6 represent loving everyone else. The 4th commandment is the Sabbath, and this is the connection between God and humans. The Sabbath, more than the other commandments, was made to benefit humans, and for God to be honoured. This is why Jesus says, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." Jesus isn't saying that we own the Sabbath, so we can do whatever we want with it. He's saying that we need to understand that the Sabbath was made for us because it's beneficial for us to keep it. So we shouldn't look at it as a burden or a pain to have to keep it, as if it's somehow bad for us or damaging for us to follow it. We need to see it this way, but we also need to remember that it's a commandment, so it must be kept. The Sabbath is a test of our faith, but it's also a sign that we worship the only real God who made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. No other God. And it's a sign that will last forever. The first and second commandments are against idolatry. And after giving the 10 commandments, God specifically warned them against idolatry. He told them not to make any gods out of silver or gold. Even making golden images to represent the true God is against the second commandment. We can't have our churches with images of God or angels or wear golden crosses, because we have a tendency to see the value in the beauty or the expense of these things, and this distracts us from the true reasons we follow God. God told Moses that they will meet enemies that worship other gods, but God will protect them and keep them healthy if they overthrow them, destroy their images, and refuse to worship their gods. This is difficult because other gods are often made out of expensive materials like gold, so they look beautiful and worthy of worship. God showed his people that the idolatry in these countries had led them to the sins that he was using the Israelites to punish. God wanted the Israelites to remove the people that were already in Israel, because otherwise the Israelites would be tempted to worship the other people's false gods. God told Abraham that all of God's followers must be circumcised, which is a cut to the skin. This is to show that God has cut them out and separated them from non-Christians to be different and special. This sign was a promise that they wouldn't marry people that didn't follow God, because if they did, they would stop thinking about and respecting God and his law, and so become like non-Christians. This sign was created because they had failed to separate so many times in the past. In the last days, Satan will do everything possible to mix Christians with non-Christians, to get them watching the same entertainment, doing the same things, and being close friends, so that there will be little difference between the two. Abraham's descendants became friends and married people that didn't follow God. If Abraham's descendants had kept separate from other nations, they wouldn't have been seduced into idolatry and copy their sinful entertainments. They lost a lot of their special character, and God punishes his people to help them. So to punish the Israelites, he caused the famine, which was what forced them to originally move to Egypt. Then God allowed the Egyptians to cause them lots of suffering, so that they would turn to God and ask him for help and obey his laws and separate from people that didn't follow him. There were a small number of families that first went into Egypt, but they grew quickly. Some were careful to teach their children God's laws, but many of the Israelites had witnessed so much idolatry that they had confused ideas about how to understand them. God came down to earth on the Sinai mountain personally and told the Israelites the commandments, so that all of the Israelites could hear him. God didn't trust angels or humans to announce the laws, and didn't even trust their memories, so he wrote them down on stone himself with his finger. He made sure that there was no possibility humans would alter the laws because of tradition or from false teachers. He then got Moses to write down the precise directions on how to keep the 10 Commandments in a simplified way so that there would be no confusion. Today, it is incredibly important that we follow the commandments as stated by God, and not how humans have decided to interpret them. Jesus gave us a better understanding of the law, but didn't change it. Jesus tells us that anyone who teaches others to see a commandment different to how God has written it is wrong. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. The Bible tells us that Satan will try to change God's commandments. He will speak against the Most High and will oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and laws. Satan succeeded, and Jesus told the Israelites they had changed the law. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And Satan will attack those who keep God's commandments. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. This means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently, obeying his commands and maintaining their faith in Jesus. In the last chapter of the Bible, God tells us that, "Blessed are they who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may enter through the gates into the city." This doesn't mean that we get to heaven by keeping his commandments. We have to accept his commandments and try to follow them, and when we break them, ask for forgiveness and try again. For us to be saved, we need forgiveness for breaking the commandments, and we can only ask for forgiveness if we are sorry for breaking them, and we can only be sorry for breaking them if we want to keep them, and if we want to keep them, then we will try to keep them. If we don't try to keep his commandments, then we clearly don't want to keep them, and therefore are not sorry for breaking them. For this reason, we would not be saved. The reason for keeping the commandments is because we know it is the right thing to do, and we love God, and we love to do what is right. We are not saved by keeping the commandments, but you can only be saved with the right attitude towards them, for your desire to want to keep them, and for your sorrow for failing. This attitude means that we will not be happy following commandments that have been changed. Only the commandments that God originally stated will do. People break the 10 Commandments and so can't have eternal life. However, accepting Jesus' death on the cross forgives us. For the people that existed before Jesus died on the cross, God created extra rules, called the handwriting of requirements. People could follow these to show that they accepted Jesus' future death on the cross, and so be forgiven and have eternal life. It wasn't the keeping of these rules that saved them, but the fact that it showed they accepted Jesus' death. The existence of the handwriting of requirements were described as being against them, because they only existed because they failed to keep the commandments. Therefore, its existence reminded them of their failure. However, once Jesus died on the cross, we don't have to keep these rules anymore, because we can accept his sacrifice directly. Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that were against us, which were contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. However, Jesus ended these rules by his death, because they represented his death. But he didn't end or change any of the 10 Commandments, and we still need to keep them the same way they were kept in the Old Testament. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. The snake had made Eve believe that sin wouldn't cause death. The handwriting of requirements included animal sacrifices to remind them that the penalty of sin is death. The breaking of God's law made it necessary for Jesus to die to make it possible for man to escape the penalty and yet still fulfill the requirement of God's law that needed death. The sacrifices showed humans that they were breaking God's law, and so it was to teach us humility and lead us to ask for forgiveness by Jesus' death. God created the system of animal sacrifices with Adam after he ate the apple, which he taught to his descendants. The system was corrupted before the flood, and by those who separated themselves from the true followers of God and built the Tower of Babel. They sacrificed to man-made gods instead of the God of heaven. They didn't sacrifice because they had faith in Jesus' future sacrifice, but because they thought it pleased their gods by offering lots of animals. Their superstition led them to bigger and bigger sacrifices, thinking that this would please their gods even more. Because of this, they started sacrificing humans. The people in these countries didn't feel the forgiving grace of God, and so made cruel laws that ignored terrible crimes but harshly punished small ones. Moses knew this and said to the people that they should be very careful to follow the laws, especially as other nations would see how they have such wise laws and are so blessed to have God helping them so much. Other people would then join the Israelites and follow God. Moses read the contract to the people, that if they would obey, they would get God's protection, help, and eternal life. The Israelites agreed, and they promised to obey everything God said. Moses then sacrificed an animal and sprinkled the blood on the people to show that they now accepted the death of Jesus and were willing to obey God as their leader.
God told the Israelites to build a temple, which they called the tabernacle. He told them precisely how each bit must be built, so that it would be as accurate as possible to the real temple in heaven. Today, Jesus is in the temple in heaven, but to understand what he's doing there, we first have to understand the temple that was on earth. The Israelites donated their gold and jewelry to build the temple. They were so keen to donate that they gave more than was needed, and Moses had to tell them to stop. God didn't force them to give things to build the temple, because for people to follow God, they have to want to follow him, so it's worthless to force people. The fact that despite difficult circumstances, the Israelites were so generous shows that they valued God's presence and blessing higher than worldly goods, and this shows us how we should be despite the difficult circumstances we often have. The times when the Israelites repeatedly complained and made mistakes is a warning of how we shouldn't be, especially as we're so close to the end of the world and difficulties for us Christians will greatly increase. Moses had to put the 2 stones that had the 10 commandments inside an ark. The ark was covered with gold, and on the top was the mercy seat. Each end was a statue of an angel. The heads looked down at the mercy seat, which represents the fact that the angels look with interest and respect at the law of God inside the ark, in the temple that is in heaven. And the tabernacle had 2 apartments, separated by a curtain. The curtain was a variety of colors, with threads of gold and silver. This represents the angels, who are connected with the work of the temple in heaven by helping and teaching Christians on earth. On the other side of the curtain was the Ark of the Testimony. Directly in front of the ark, but separated by the curtain, was the golden altar of incense. The incense filled the temple with its fragrance, day and night. The fragrance extended for miles around. This represents the prayers we make, because to God, our prayers are like sweet incense. When the priest offered the incense to God, he looked to the mercy seat, where God's presence was. The curtain meant that although the priest looked towards the mercy seat, he couldn't see God, but he had faith that the mercy seat was on the other side of the curtain. This represents people praying to Jesus, who is by the mercy seat in heaven. We cannot see Jesus, but we have faith that he is there, listening and answering our prayers. The temple had no windows, but light came from the candlestick, which kept burning 24 hours a day. The high priest could only go into the most holy place, on the other side of the curtain, once a year. This was after careful preparation, because it was the special place where you could see God's glory. The high priest was always nervous when he went in. The Israelites would wait outside, desperate to hear the priest say that God blessed the people. If the priest took a long time, they would be worried that their sins were so bad that God had killed the priest. After the temple was built, God's glory filled it, and a cloud covered it in the daytime, and a fire covered it at the night time. It was built so that it could be taken apart and taken with them on their travels. God led the Israelites with the cloud. When he wanted them to stop and stay somewhere, he made the cloud drop and rest directly over the temple. God would lift the cloud up high to signal that he wanted them to start moving again. The tribes had to travel in order and had to put their tents just how God wanted them to arrange them around the temple. When they traveled, the ark was always at the front. The Israelites asked God to protect them from their enemies, so God would go out and do this during the day, and return and be with them when they were camped. Aaron and his 2 eldest sons, Nadab and Abihu, were priests. Their job included offering sacrifices to God on the altar in the tabernacle. God showed that he accepted the sacrifices by making the offerings to catch fire. Priests were supposed to burn incense using the fire that God put on the altar. However, Aaron's sons made their own fire to burn the incense. Because of this, God sent down fire and killed Nadab and Abihu. After Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu were the most important Israelites. We should all remember that no one can get away with sinning without punishment because of who they are, how close to God they have been, or how much good they have done. God brings you closer to him so that you can work harder for him, not so that you can feel safe to sin. Aaron hadn't been strict enough with Nadab and Abihu when they were kids. He should have made sure that they knew not to do things that seemed fun if it went against God. We often think that giving kids freedom is the right thing to do, but we see that with Nadab and Abihu, even working in such important jobs as adults wasn't enough to correct their lack of self-discipline from childhood, to follow exactly and not roughly as God requires us to follow Him, and this led to their deaths. God requires us to respect Him and understand the seriousness of needing to follow Him in the way that He tells us to follow Him. God doesn't accept it when we partially obey Him. Nadab and Abihu did everything close to how God asked for. God tells us that we have to follow all of the 10 Commandments in the way that He tells us to. If we fail, He will forgive us, but Nadab and Abihu didn't try to follow God in the right way. They knew God had told them to use the fire from the altar, but they thought that God wouldn't mind if they made their own fire. When we look at the 10 Commandments, are we following them in the way that God tells us to follow them? Or are we changing them to be the commandments that we want to follow? If we are choosing to change them and assume God doesn't mind, then we could be heading for the fire at the end of the world. Aaron wasn't allowed to show sadness for his son's deaths, because otherwise people would sympathize with Nadab and Abihu, and then they would forget how serious their sin was. Then they wouldn't see sins as being that important, and they would be more likely to copy them. We must warn people how serious their sins are, so they know that they need to change. Today we have forgotten how serious sin is, like Nadab and Abihu, and we think that the 10 Commandments don't need to be kept in the exact way they state. We think that because God forgives us when we try but fail to keep the commandments, He's not strict and doesn't mind if we keep a relaxed or changed version of the commandments. If we choose to follow a relaxed or changed version of the commandments and still expect God to forgive us, then He can't. We are forgiven when we choose but fail to follow God's law, not when we choose to follow a different law. If we knowingly choose to follow a relaxed or different law, then we are breaking God's commandments, but are not sorry for it. If we are not sorry for breaking them, then God can't forgive us. If we were really sorry for not following Him, then we would make the decision to follow His laws and not put ourselves above them. Because God refuses to force us to follow Him, and we are refusing to listen to the Holy Spirit to change, there is nothing more that God can do for us. We won't get forgiveness, so we will have to get the punishment for the sin, which is eternal death. A lot of people will not go to heaven because they assume God is relaxed about how His laws are kept and whether we can keep a slightly different version. Whether this is the Sabbath or any of the commandments, this may make us end up in fire like Nadab and Abihu, but this will be the eternal fire of hell.
God told Moses to send men to Canaan, the land they would live in and call Israel. A ruler from each of the tribes went. After 40 days they returned and showed the Israelites the fruits that they had collected from the land. One bunch of grapes was so big that 2 men had to carry it between them on a stick. They also brought figs and pomegranates, and the Israelites were impressed with how fertile the land seemed. 10 of the 12 men that had gone to Canaan said that it would be very difficult for the Israelites to take it, because the people already living there were very strong, and there were large defensive walls around the cities. When the Israelites heard the report, they were very disappointed, and they didn't trust that God would give them the strength to take the land from the other people. Caleb and Joshua were the 2 spies that told the Israelites that they should still go and take the land, because God would make sure that they succeed. The other spies responded by announcing that this would be impossible, because the people in Canaan were so tall they looked like giants compared to the Israelites. Although the non-Christian world looked like big and powerful giants compared to us, with famous and rich and intelligent celebrities and scientists all saying that we're wrong, God tells us that He will give us the strength to defeat them. Today we're striving to enter New Jerusalem, and we must do this by continuing to bring ourselves and others closer to God. In 1888, we had the opportunity to have Jesus return to earth and go to New Jerusalem. In that year, 2 Adventist leaders called Jones and Wagner told the other Adventist leaders that the church had forgotten that although we should keep the commandments, it is Jesus, not our success at keeping the law, that gets us into heaven. The leaders didn't accept Jones and Wagner, and they made fun of them. Jones and Wagner represented Joshua and Caleb, and the leaders were the other spies that stopped the church from completing their journey from Egypt to Canaan. The Israelites blamed Moses and Aaron again, saying that they would die if they fight the people in Canaan, so it would have been better for them to have stayed in Egypt. They ignored all of the miracles that God had done for them, and said that God had lied to them, promising that they would get this land. They agreed to replace Moses and Aaron and elect a new leader to bring them back to Egypt. Moses and Aaron knew that God would give them the land, and they knew that the Israelites were acting very badly. In front of everyone, Moses and Aaron knelt to beg God that he would stay with them and help them despite the rebellion and lack of trust that the Israelites were showing. However, they were both so sad that they couldn't speak, and they knelt in silence. Caleb and Joshua reminded the people how good and fertile the land seemed, and that if they followed God, then he would ensure that they get to live in that land. They told the Israelites to stop rebelling and to trust God, because they shouldn't be scared, because God is on their side, not the side of the people in Canaan. The Israelites were angry with Caleb and Joshua for telling them to do something which looked as if it would kill them, and the Israelites were about to stone them, but God stopped them. Moses went into the tabernacle to speak to God. God told Moses that because the Israelites kept refusing to follow him, he will pick a new people to follow him. God offered to make Moses the father of a new nation that would be God's people instead of the Israelites. Moses showed love for the Israelites and for God to be respected by other countries by asking God to stay with the Israelites, saying that if God left the Israelites, other countries would think that they didn't enter Canaan because God wasn't powerful enough. God agreed to again give the Israelites another chance. However, God said that the Israelites who rebelled again and again, despite seeing all of God's miracles, will not get to go into Canaan. They will be in the desert for 40 years in total, until everyone that's currently 20 and older has died. The Israelites were told of their punishment. Because Caleb and Joshua were different and chose to follow God, they will still be alive and will get to enter Canaan. They were very close to Canaan and could have entered and finished their journey, but because of their rebellion, God told them to go back into the desert, to the Red Sea. The Amalekites and the Canaanites heard about the spies and were getting ready to make war with the Israelites, so God told Moses to go back to the Red Sea to protect them. Moses' cousin Korah was a well-respected man who worked in the tabernacle. However, he was jealous that Aaron's family got to be priests. He thought that Moses had made this rule, and he wanted to overthrow him and Aaron. Dathan and Abiram were two of the leaders of the tribe of Reuben. Because Reuben was Jacob's eldest son, they thought that they should have more authority than the leaders from other tribes, and they agreed with Korah that if they overthrew Moses and Aaron, they would share the leadership. The Israelites kept forgetting that God was their leader and that Moses was following God. They were very unhappy with the punishment that everyone over 20 had to die in the desert, and they thought it was Moses that had decided this, not God. Because of this, a lot of people wanted Korah to be their new leader and to take them out of the desert immediately. Satan had tempted the leaders of the tribes to be jealous and to think that Moses had selfishly given himself a position to make him more important and powerful. They wanted some of the glory from doing that job. Eventually these thoughts grew, and they secretly spoke to others about it, saying that they only say these things for the good of the Israelites. When they found that others agreed with them, they thought that they were working for God, and they carried out their plan to overthrow Moses. The rebels needed people to tell them off, but instead people were sympathetic and supported them. They made people believe that the Israelites hadn't done anything wrong, and that God didn't want them to die in the desert, but Moses was forcing this punishment on them. They looked back at all the times God had punished them, and they agreed that each time was because of Moses' mismanagement. Korah said that if he were leader, he wouldn't tell them off when they sinned, but instead would concentrate on telling them how good they were, and this would make their journey much nicer and successful. Korah told the people that God wanted him to be the leader. However, some people didn't believe Korah, saying that Moses had worked so hard for everyone and gets nothing in reward. Korah had to invent a selfish motive for Moses, and said that Moses had brought them into the desert so that he can steal all their belongings. The rebellion was initially done secretly, but when it grew strong enough, Korah publicly accused Moses of not sharing his authority. Korah said that the Israelites were all holy followers of God, and yet Moses steals all the power for himself. Moses was shocked to hear this, and he kneeled and prayed to God. When he got up, he told them that God says that he will show who are his holy followers tomorrow. It was delayed to the next day so that everyone could have time to think about what they were doing and to ask God whether it was the right thing. Moses asked to speak to Dathan and Abiram in the hope of changing their mind, but they refused. They said that Moses pretended to be guided by God, but this clearly wasn't true because they were still in the desert, not the land that God had promised to give them. The next morning, Korah led 250 leaders to the outside of the tabernacle to see how God would judge them. They assumed that Moses and Aaron would be found guilty and themselves innocent. God made the earth open up, and a deep pit was created that Korah, Dathan, and Abiram fell into. God gave the 250 leaders time to see that they were following the wrong people and have an opportunity to repent. However, they didn't change sides, so God caused fire to destroy them all. God showed this to all the Israelites, so that there would be no question who they should follow. The people stopped their rebellion because of fear of what they had seen, not because they were sorry for doing the wrong thing. They were given a day to think and repent. The people didn't want to accept that they were wrong, because that would mean accepting that they wouldn't get to go into Canaan and would have to die in the desert, as Moses had said. Also, they wanted leaders that would say that they were good people rather than telling them off for their sins. Korah had said nice things and seemed to really care for them. He seemed like a good guy, so it made sense that Moses, not God, had somehow caused them to die. The Israelites weren't sorry for wanting Moses and Aaron to be replaced, and Satan spent that night with them, making them think that Moses had used the power of Satan to kill the rebels. This sealed their doom. If you choose to think that the Holy Spirit is actually Satan, then how can God help you? You will ignore God when he tells you of your sins and how you are wrong. The next morning, the Israelites complained that Moses and Aaron had killed the people, not God. They didn't repent, so God told Moses he would kill them, and he sent a plague. Moses begged God to end the plague. God accepted this and told Moses that he had already sent the plague, but if Moses made a sacrifice, the plague would stop. Moses did this, and the plague stopped, but 14,000 people had already died from it. God then showed them a miraculous sign to prove that he wanted Aaron's family to be the priests. People admitted that they had sinned, and they accepted that God had picked Moses and Aaron to be their leaders, and they accepted that they would have to die in the wilderness. The rebellion of Korah shows us the same mistakes involved with Satan's rebellion in heaven. Satan tries to make us proud and jealous of others, not satisfied with what we've got, wanting more importance and respect. He entices us, teaching that we are holy people, safer and freer from the law than we should be. We follow Satan, thinking we are working for God, and anyone who says otherwise are considered the one who is working for Satan. These leaders misrepresent the people that are truly working for God, and by constantly teaching lies, they start believing them. It is always difficult for God's true workers, because people always prefer not to be told off when breaking God's law. and will more likely listen to a teacher who doesn't reprove and allows them more freedom. Many churches today don't teach obedience to the true commandments. In church and the world, we tend not to tell people off. We encourage people when we should reprove. When Noah was building the boat and knew that the world was soon to be destroyed, he reproved, not encouraged the people. We know today that sudden destruction is coming soon. However, reproving should always be done nicely, and we are forbidden to judge whether someone is a good Christian or if we are better than them based on the things we see them do wrong. This is because only God knows each person's circumstances, difficulties and motives. So whilst we can reprove people for doing something wrong, only God can fairly judge them. We need to make sure we don't dwell on thoughts and do things that Satan encourages. When we do this, our thoughts and actions worsen, and it gets harder and harder to stop. Over time, the sin doesn't seem wrong anymore, and people become angry with anyone who reproves them by telling them it's wrong. They often defend themselves by condemning the reprover and looking for others that support them. This happened against the reformers who reproved, and it is happening today.
God brought the Israelites back to Meribah, which is where God had tested whether they would trust him to provide them with water. Nearly 40 years ago, God had made water come from the stone, but now they were back there, they found the water had stopped. God stopped the water to test them again. The Israelites were angry with Moses for bringing them somewhere without water, saying that if there is no water, then they might as well have died with Korah, Dathan and Abiram. Moses and Aaron prayed, and God told Moses to tell the rock to give water. Moses and Aaron gathered everyone to the rock, and told them that he would make water come from the rock. He then hit it twice with the rod. Moses was wrong, because he didn't say that it was God that would bring the water, and he hit the rock twice. He wasn't supposed to hit the rock at all this time, because he had already hit the rock nearly 40 years ago. The rock represents Jesus, and hitting it represents his sacrifice on the cross. In total, Moses hit the rock 3 times, but Jesus died only once for our sins, not 3 times. Moses had told the Israelites that it was by his own power that he did the miracle, and there was a risk that they thought that this was true. To stop the Israelites thinking this, God punished Moses by having him die before getting to Canaan. God had given Moses a lot. God had spoken to Moses face to face like a friend, and got Moses to do lots of honorable things. Moses was very sorry for his sin, and told the Israelites how much he regretted it. He told them the punishment God had given him for it, to show the Israelites that he was just a man. We are all judged based on how much knowledge and help God has given us. The punishment was strong because Moses had been given so much by God, and had become such a good follower that God was pleased with him. It hurts God a lot more when good followers sin. Satan celebrates and makes fun of the angels when he succeeds at this. Aaron died at Mount Hor because he had sinned with Moses, and God said he couldn't enter Canaan as well. Moses and Aaron's sons buried him in the mountainside, so that the people wouldn't be tempted to make too great a ceremony over his body and be guilty of the sin of idolatry. The fastest route to Canaan was to walk through a country called Edom. The Edomites were descendants of Esau, the older brother of Jacob, who was the ancestor of the Israelites. In later years, this country, Edom, would join with the Babylonians to conquer Israel.
Israel today is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and Edom today, the older brother of the Israelites, are the Protestant churches. They sold their birthright and will unite with the Catholic Church, and just as Edom, Cain and Abel, the older brothers who follow God in the wrong way, they will try to kill the people who follow God the right way. The Protestant churches will join with the Catholic Church and will one day attack the Adventists. Just as Jacob's night of wrestling saved him from Esau, Adventists will have a time of trouble and wrestling that will protect us from the Catholics and other Protestants. And then Jesus' return will destroy both of these churches. God told the Israelites not to harm the Edomites, because although they didn't follow him, God wanted them time for an opportunity to learn and accept him. Moses asked the king of Edom to let them pass through the country, but the king refused. For this reason, the Israelites went around Edom instead. Had Edom allowed the Israelites through their country, they would have had the opportunity to learn more about God and accept him. So it would have been better for Edom to have allowed them. Edom would have allowed them if they had asked nearly 40 years ago when they first came, but the spies told them not to. It's the same for the Adventist Church. We didn't go through the Protestant churches in 1888. Satan had worked to create such negative thoughts and organizations against us that the Protestant churches now see us as their enemy. The other Protestants are likely to resist us. Protestants are unlikely to want to listen to us, but God has still given them the opportunity to join us, and we should use this. God had protected the Israelites from a lot of things that would have hurt them. They had continually thought they would die because they didn't see all the things God had already protected them from. To increase their trust in God, he allowed them to be bitten by snakes in the desert. Moses then created a brass serpent and put it on a pole. When they got bitten, they were to look at the snake, and then they would be healed. The snake represents Jesus. He is represented as a snake because sin is represented as a snake. And although Jesus never sins, when we ask him to, he puts our sins onto himself, thereby removing and healing us of our sins. By looking at the snake, this taught the Israelites to trust that Jesus protects and heals them. It is not done in their own power. The Israelites came to the Jordan River and set up their tents. On the other side of the river was the country of Moab. They stayed by the border whilst Moses planned how to take over Canaan. The people that lived in that area worshipped Baal and were immoral. The Moabites were very scared that the Israelites would conquer them. They knew that they wouldn't be able to protect themselves because the Israelites had God fighting for them. The Moabites had heard that there was a man called Balaam in Mesopotamia who had supernatural powers, and they thought that they could ask him to use these powers to stop the Israelites. They offered Balaam a large reward to do this. Balaam wanted the reward, but he was once a good man who followed God, and he knew that God was on the Israelites' side, and that he couldn't do anything against them. Satan used the fact that Balaam coveted the reward to turn him against the Israelites. We often think we can break God's law in a small way for some sort of worldly benefit or fun, and then go back to God afterwards. This is often not the case, because one wrong thing can cause us to be under Satan's control, which is very difficult to escape. Balaam desperately wanted the reward, so he delayed making his decision, and kept thinking about and asking God if he should go. God told him not to, but because Balaam wouldn't give up, God eventually told him to go. God allowed him to do what he wanted, even though it was the wrong thing for him to do. Balaam knew it was wrong, but kept asking God because he wouldn't give up the reward. If we already know that something's wrong, then we shouldn't keep praying to God to tell us if it's okay.
Balaam should have asked God for the strength to say no to the Moabites. Balaam got on his donkey and went to Moab. An angel kept standing in the way of the donkey to stop Balaam. The donkey kept stopping, and Balaam got increasingly angry and kept hitting the donkey. The angel spoke through the donkey and told Balaam to stop. The donkey saw the angel, but Balaam was blinded by his greed for the Moabite reward. Reward blinds us sometimes from hearing God tell us not to do something wrong. Balaam should have also seen, by the fact that he was cruel to his donkey, in hitting him again and again, that Satan was influencing his actions, not God. God cares for humans and animals. God then allowed Balaam to continue to Moab if he told them exactly what God wanted him to. Balaam wasn't allowed to say anything to them that wasn't from God. Balaam was to show the Moabites that God was protecting the Israelites. Balaam told the Moabites the words that God told him to say, and instead of a curse, he gave Israel blessings. Balaam said that Israel's king would be more powerful than the strongest king they know. Israel's king was Jesus. The king of Moab was angry with Balaam for everything he said. And Balaam went back home. He was very disappointed and desperate to somehow get the reward. Now he would do whatever it took to get the reward. He knew that the Israelites were protected because they kept God's commandments. If he got them to sin, then they wouldn't have God protecting them anymore. Balaam went back to the king of Moab with his new plan to get the Israelites to sin, and the king agreed with this plan. Balaam saw his plan work, but he died in the war with the Midianites. Balaam's story is similar to Judas's. Both of them wanted and failed to earn lots of money for working for God. Despite following God and having lots of Christian knowledge, a single cherished sin poisoned all of their morals and destroyed them. If there is one unchristian desire that we cherish and don't remove, then we lose defense from Satan, and over time he damages our whole character. Every day we must pray for God to strengthen us from breaking his law. The king of Moab organized a festival, and Balaam encouraged the Israelites to attend. The Israelites thought Balaam was one of God's prophets, so they agreed to go. At the festival there was music, dancing, food and wine. This reduced the Israelites' self-control, and the local women were successful in seducing and getting them to join in bowing down to false gods. Sexual promiscuity and drunken feasts and dancing was seen as a way of worshipping idols. People today go to nightclubs and bars thinking that it's not related to spirituality or religion. However, this is unchristian behavior that praises Satan. So any club we go to is the same as a sinful celebration of false gods. If we go to music concerts or events with celebrities or movies, we feel things towards famous people that we should only feel towards God. So we celebrate the celebrities as idols, or in other words, false gods. Like the Israelites then, we often don't see how terrible this sin is. We often go to these places with non-Christians, and it's rare we think about God when we're there. We risk mixing and falling in love with people that are not Christians. This has destroyed endless people's faith. The Israelites didn't notice how terrible what they were doing was, and this behavior spread through the camp. Their story shows us why Satan gets us to sin. We don't necessarily lose our faith by sin, but it separates us from God and allows Satan to take more control. The more control that Satan has, the more we then sin, and the further from God we get, until eventually we lose our faith. God showed them how bad their actions were by allowing a plague to spread through the camp. God told them to kill all of the leaders that sinned and hang their bodies in the camp so that people would realize how horrendous their sin was. The Israelites saw that the punishment was right and apologized to God and stopped sinning. God then stopped the plague. We may think we're safe from Satan, but we may be wrong. He tricks us, telling us that we're safe and don't need to change.
He's had thousands of years to learn our weaknesses, and in the past he successfully tempted and tricked even the strongest Christian leaders. Now that we're on the borders of Canaan again, as in heavenly Israel, he'll try extra hard to stop us getting in. He's made the world teach us to be friends with non-Christians, overeat, drink alcohol, overvalue looks, and do things and go to tempting places for the sake of having fun and laughter. All of these things distract us from God and remove his protection. They cause us serious temptations to have casual sex. It is imperative, therefore, that we spend time looking at these stories and seeing what our weaknesses are. Satan got them to first see sexual scenes before they bowed down to false gods. Sexual indulgence makes it much harder to discern whether other things are sinful or okay. It becomes impossible to appreciate the value of God, ourselves, the commandments, and Jesus' sacrifice. Satan got the Israelites to socialize with people that didn't follow God. Like the Israelites, if we have non-Christian friends, we will likely join in and not see the sinfulness of their amusements. We must stay away from temptation if we expect God to protect us from them. We meet with non-Christians only when it's to bring them to God. Come out from among them, and be ye separate, says the Lord, and touch not the unclean. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. The friendship of the world is enmity with God. Whoever, therefore, will be a friend of the world is an enemy of God. Satan works to make us more likely to sin. He makes us feel confident and secure in God, which is actually only the case if we spend time with God and pray for protection. We relax and indulge ourselves in things like food, and we have a self-indulgent, selfish mindset. Then when we see people do sinful things, we start imagining and thinking about them until we feel like it's something we want to do, rather than something that would go against God. Satan has made us desensitized to sin by making us see it everywhere. With books, magazines and films, he surrounds us with sin, sexual immorality, and crime with exciting stories. Over time, we don't see anything wrong with these things and become interested, fascinated in them. This makes us think about impure things, so we have to be careful about what we read and see, and stop ourselves thinking and daydreaming about everything we feel like. Gird up the loins of your mind, not fashioning yourselves according to your former lusts. Be holy, for I am holy. Most of the entertainment today causes the same damage to Christians as the pagan idol-worshipping entertainment in the past. Satan uses these things like the cinema to encourage us to glorify immorality, following our emotions and wants rather than what is right. When we go to places just because it's enjoyable, our pride and selfish wants are indulged, and we don't talk or think about God. Satan gains control. We have to make an effort to resist these temptations. We must avoid reading, seeing, or hearing things that suggest impure thoughts. Our minds shouldn't be left to wander at random on every thought that Satan suggests. To protect ourselves from falling away to these temptations, we need to be constantly praying, studying the Bible, and carefully watching out to avoid things that tempt us. We need to allow the Holy Spirit to guide our thoughts and form the habit of thinking about holy things. Israel's sin caused God to punish them. Although the same sins don't seem to be punished now, in time they will be. The sins defile our bodies, and our bodies are the temple of God. If a man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. These sins are the major sins that have caused the disease and suffering in the world today. These sins will also cause the eternal punishment. They which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God, but with Satan and evil angels shall have their part in that lake of fire, which is the second death.
The lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Remove thy way far from her, and come not nigh the door of her house, lest thou give thine honour unto others, and thy years unto the cruel, lest thy strangers be filled with thy wealth, and thy labours be in the house of a stranger, and thou mourn at the last, when thy flesh and thy body are consumed. Her house inclineth unto death, none that go unto her return again. Her guests are in the depths of hell. The story of the Israelites mixing with the Moabites and Midianites represents God's church today mixing with other churches and non-Christians. This was the last apostasy before entering Canaan, and this is the last apostasy for Adventists. Our church is mixing our beliefs with other denominations, and we are friends with worldly people. The leaders have led us into this apostasy. But when we learn to separate, God's divine rebuke against us will end, and the latter rain will fall to prepare us for the end, for entering New Jerusalem.
Moses knew that he didn't have much longer to live, and he gathered the new generation of Israelites to make sure they knew everything that had happened to them since they left Egypt. He told them about all the mistakes along the way, and the reason their parents weren't allowed to enter Canaan. Moses made sure they understood that they needed to keep the 10 Commandments. He told them the promises God gave to them if they followed these commandments, and the curses if they didn't. He especially warned them against idolatry. Moses also wrote all of the rules for sacrificial offerings and lifestyle in a book that he told them to put in the side of the ark for reference. They were in Moab, a country next to Canaan, and Moses went up Mount Nebo, and God showed him Canaan in the distance. Moses laid down and died at the age of 120. Satan celebrated that he had caused Moses to sin, and therefore die before reaching Canaan. If Moses hadn't sinned, then he wouldn't have died. He would have been taken directly to heaven. Soon after his death, Jesus came to resurrect him and take him to heaven. As Jesus approached the body of Moses to bring him back to life, Satan was there and tried to stop him. Satan was too weak for Jesus and told Jesus that he wanted Moses because of his sin. Jesus told Satan that Moses had repented, so God had removed all of his sins, and he resurrected Moses and took him to heaven. After Moses died, Joshua became the leader. He had been a leader under Moses and had been one of the 2 spies that encouraged people to go into Canaan. God encouraged Joshua, saying that he would be with him as he was with Moses, and if Israel followed his commandments, he would make it easy to conquer Canaan. God told Joshua that he will separate the water of the Jordan River so that they can cross. The priests had to travel over the river first with the ark, which represented the presence of God. God made the land dry across the river like he did at the Red Sea. They all crossed and then built a monument so that they would see it and remember and be comforted that God is with them. In the desert, God was testing and reproving the Israelites to become better followers and remove the idolatry and unhealthy practices they had got from the Egyptians. Now that they were out of the desert, the process of correction was over, and they were allowed to be circumcised and do Passover again. We are in the wilderness now, coming out of Babylon. We are under the correcting time, where we have to remove all idolatry and unhealthy practices that we get from the world. If we are successful, we will get into New Jerusalem, into heavenly Canaan. The other countries had made fun of Israel for staying so long in the desert. These countries said that God didn't have the power to bring them into Canaan. Now that God had separated the Jordan River and the Israelites had crossed it into Israel, the enemies were silent. Joshua was praying and saw a man with a sword. He didn't look like an Israelite, So Joshua wondered if he was an enemy. The man revealed that he was Jesus. Joshua bowed down, and Jesus told him to take off his shoes in respect. Jesus then told Joshua how to take over the city of Jericho. The army had to walk around the city once a day for 6 days. Then on the 7th day they had to go around Jericho 7 times. Joshua did this and ensured they went around the city with the ark and priests, who blew trumpets. The watchmen in Jericho were amazed at what was happening. They couldn't understand what it all meant. Some of them made fun of the Israelites, but others remembered hearing about God separating the Red Sea and Jordan for them, and they were scared. Strong warriors were posted at the gates, ready to fight, and it looked to them that it would be impossible for the Israelites to succeed. After going around the city the 7th time, on the 7th day, the priests blew the trumpets, and the walls fell down. This made the people of Jericho terrified and too paralyzed with fear to stop the Israelites from taking the city. This miracle was done to make sure that the Israelites understood that when they conquered Canaan, it was by God's power, not theirs. It also increased their faith in God to protect and fight for them, and showed how wrong they were to listen to the 10 spies who told them that they would fail if they tried to take over Canaan. We as Christians are to fight the world. Satan has set up theories and entertainments that work against God. And it seems impossible for us to teach the world to follow God when we are fighting against such big, rich things. We have to remember that God fights with us, and He tells us that we will win. Joshua was a wise leader that was devoted to God. Just before he died, he reminded them all of the events in the wilderness, including how the king of Moab followed Balaam, but Baal was a false and powerless god against the true God. Joshua told them they shouldn't delay to decide whether they are going to serve God or any of the false gods. The Israelites told him that they couldn't serve any other gods after seeing the true God rescuing them from Egypt and doing such amazing things in protecting them in the desert. Therefore they promised to serve and obey God.
The ark, with the 10 Commandments inside, represented God. The ark was seen as Israel's glory and strength. Jesus and 3 angels always went with the ark to guard it from danger and to fulfill any mission that God had told the Israelites to complete. Jesus and the 3 angels went in front of the ark as it came to the Jordan River. They stood by the ark until all the Israelites had crossed over. Jesus and the angels also went with the ark as it was carried around Jericho, and they were the ones that made the massive walls fall down. Eli was the high priest, so he went into the most holy place in the tabernacle once a year. He had 2 sons who were priests, but were not allowed to enter that area of the temple. His sons worked at the door of the tabernacle, where they were overseeing the sacrifices of the animals. They continually abused their positions. They were selfish, jealous, greedy, and extravagant, and their sins caused the Israelites to sin. They gave themselves the best cuts of meat and committed adultery. Eli told his sons off, but he didn't stop them. God then reproved Eli for not properly disciplining his sons. God then picked a new prophet called Samuel, who told Eli that God would punish his family by not allowing any of them to live to an old age. No sacrifice could forgive his sons, because they knew that they were sinning against God and showed no respect
for the sacrifice which represented Jesus' death on the cross, the sacrifice that was supposed to forgive them. Soon afterwards, the Israelites made and lost a war with the Philistines. The Israelites were scared. They knew that if other nations heard about their defeat, they might start a war against them. The elders decided that they had lost because they hadn't taken the ark with them. They thought about the fact that it had been so easy to take over Jericho when they took the ark, and assumed that just having the ark is what made them win their wars. They didn't realize that the strength they had previously was because they obeyed the 10 commandments that were inside the ark. The commandments, not the container, was what represented God. Eli's sons were breaking these commandments, and they were the men that agreed to move the ark from the tabernacle in a place called Shiloh to the Israelite battle camp. People then felt confident that they would win their wars. The Philistines heard that the ark was in the battle camp, and they were scared because they thought that God was now in the camp with the Israelites, and they thought that the ark had defeated the Egyptians. However, the Philistines still fought. They killed Eli's sons, and Israel ended up losing the war terribly. The Philistines thought that the ark was the Israelites' God, so they took it back to their country. They didn't know about the real living God who created everything and gave the 10 commandments, sending prosperity and adversity according to whether people obey or break his law. When Eli heard that his sons had been killed and had taken the ark, he fell backwards and died. God allowed the Philistines to take his ark to show the Israelites how useless it was to trust in the ark, the symbol of his presence, while they were breaking the commandments that were inside. The Philistines thought that by having the ark, their enemies would fear them. They put the ark in a temple next to their most popular god, the fish god Dagon. In the morning, the priests of these gods entered the temple and were terrified to find the Dagon statue had fallen to the ground in front of the ark. They thought it had fallen accidentally, so they picked him back up. However, the next morning again they found him in front of the ark, with his face to the ground, but also his head and hands were cut off. The angels who always follow the ark did this to show that the living God was above all gods, and compared to him, every false god is worthless. The Philistines had a lot of respect for Dagon, and when they saw what happened, they thought it was a sign that they and their gods would be destroyed by the Israelites, and that their God is more powerful than all other gods. They moved the ark so that it was by itself. The Philistines suffered large outbreaks of tumors. They attributed it to the ark and moved it from city to city. But wherever it went, it caused the people to have disease. The Philistines didn't know what to do with it. They were too scared to damage or open it because of what it had done to their god Dagon. They decided that they would have to send it back to the Israelites and apologize to their God for taking the ark by sending the Israelites very expensive gifts. Some people thought that it was too humiliating to do this and said that anyone who took the ark back
would be risking their own life from the diseases the ark causes. Others told them not to be like the Egyptians, where it took 10 plagues until they finally did what the Israelites' God wanted. They agreed to make a cart attached to 2 cows. They put the ark on this with lots of gold and jewels, and then see if God makes the cows walk to Israel. The cows took the cart straight to Israel. Some Philistines followed behind the cart, making sure that no damage occurred, in case that would cause God to punish the Philistines even more. They didn't realize that God's angels were with the ark, guiding it to where it belonged. Some Israelites saw the cows bringing the ark, and they celebrated. They offered the cart, cows, and the payment from the Philistines to God. The Philistines' plague then ended. The Israelites that found the ark wondered what was inside it that was so powerful. They didn't see that God had done this, and like the Philistines, thought that the ark had the power. Looking inside the ark was like looking at God. Only the high priest could do it without dying. They opened the ark and looked inside. The angels that followed the ark killed more than 50,000 people for this. The Israelites in that area saw this and respected and feared God. A man called Eleazar looked after the ark in his dad's house for 20 years. During this time, the Israelites kept losing battles against the Philistines, and this humbled them, and they asked God to forgive them for breaking his law. Because they had changed and again tried to keep his commandments, God made the Israelites strong so that their enemies couldn't beat them. Solomon was their prophet now, and he was getting old. His children didn't follow God and broke the commandments. The Israelites saw this and wanted to have a king like other countries. Their first king was Saul, who became so corrupt that God replaced him with David. Eleazar looked after the ark until David was made king. David and 30,000 Israelites took the ark in a cart to Jerusalem. Uzzah and Ahio were driving the cart. At one point, the bulls pulling the cart stumbled, and the ark shook. Uzzah held on to the ark to protect it, and God immediately killed him for doing this. God did this because God had told the Israelites that no one could touch the ark. They must respect its holiness, and Uzzah broke this law because he didn't trust that God could protect the ark. This made David scared. He knew he broke the commandments sometimes, and was worried that if he had to look after the ark, he might end up doing something like Uzzah and die. He therefore asked a good man called Obed-Edom to look after it for a few months. God blessed Obed-Edom. God showed that his ark would kill those who broke the commandments that were contained within it, but it was a blessing to those that obeyed them. David built a tabernacle in Jerusalem and tried to follow the commandments and make himself as holy as possible before he took the ark off Obed-Edom. Solomon was David's son, and he replaced David as king. Solomon built an impressive temple for the ark. It was according to the same designs that God had given Moses, so that it was a close copy of the true temple in heaven, where the blood used is Jesus' blood, not the blood of animals which represent Jesus. The ark was put in the most holy place of the temple, under the statue of the 2 cherubims. Solomon added 2 more statues of angels to represent the angels that always protect the law. God was pleased with the temple, and he resided in it, accepting the sacrifices they offered. God promised to Solomon that the temple would exist forever if the Israelites followed God and his commandments. Israel didn't keep the commandments, and about 100 years after the temple was built, the Babylonians conquered them and took them to Babylon as slaves. God told a few people that the Babylonians would destroy the temple. Therefore, just before this happened, they took the ark and hid it in a cave. It was never found after that, and is still in the cave today. Just as God had told the Israelites how long they would be in Egypt, he also told them how long they would be in Babylon. God told an Israelite that was in Babylon called Daniel that 49 years after the king's command to rebuild Jerusalem in 457 BC, the streets and walls of Jerusalem would be rebuilt. He also told Daniel that Jesus would start his work on earth 434 years after the command, and that 3.5 years after that, Jesus would die, which would end the sacrificial system in the temple on earth. This is because they would be forgiven by Jesus' sacrifice, who would then use his own blood to forgive the people in the temple in heaven. Daniel was also told that 3.5 years after Jesus died, the Israelite leaders would reject him, and the Israelites wouldn't be God's church anymore. God's people would be those who accept Jesus and follow his commandments. Daniel was also told that 2,300 years after the command, which was in 1844, Jesus will have finished his work in the holy place in the temple in heaven, where he uses his blood to put the sins on the sanctuary, and he will move into the most holy place at that time. This is where the true ark is, the one with the stones with the 10 Commandments on, to judge who will be saved.